I would like to thank the organizers of this webinar meeting, the International Information and Networking Center for Intangible Cultural Heritage in the Asia-Pacific region, Director General Keum, and the UNESCO Appia Office for their kind invitation to deliver a keynote for the meeting, Maritime Living Heritage, Building Sustainable Livelihood and Ecosystems in the Asia-Pacific region. My name is Athena Trakadas, and I'm a maritime archaeologist at the National Museum of Denmark, and I'm co-chair, along with Anthony Firth, of the Ocean Decade Heritage Network. As a maritime archaeologist, I focus on the past exploitation of marine resources, but this means I also spend a lot of time documenting modern fishing communities, especially in North Africa, where this picture was taken. And that is my area of study for intangible cultural heritage in the maritime community. This present ICH meeting, of course, is part of the expert meeting for building a network on maritime ICH with the overall aim of sharing information and raising awareness for safeguarding ICH to various stakeholders. And specifically, within the concept note of today's meeting, there are three objectives. To improve our awareness of the relation between maritime ICH and the pillars of sustainable development, namely environmental sustainability, inclusive social development, and economic development. Explore maritime ICH transmission and safeguarding activities for environmental sustainability and resilience, and establish a network of diverse stakeholders for the safeguarding of maritime ICH in the Asia-Pacific region. Today, I would like to address the third objective in more detail by focusing on the efforts to establish networks at a global and at regional level for safeguarding maritime cultural heritage as a key to reach a sustainable future. I would like to do this by discussing the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development 2021-2030 and the role of the Ocean Decade Heritage Network for serving as a potential link between the Ocean Decades initiatives and maritime living heritage stakeholders. I believe that we are all familiar at this point with the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its 17 SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals. Part of the measurable steps towards reaching SDG 14, life below water, depends on monitoring the ocean's state, so physical, biogeochemical, ecosystems, and the human impact on the ocean. The Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development 2021-2030, I'll call it the Decade for short, is a UN initiative housed within UNESCO and the IOC, the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, and it's very much linked to supporting the efforts of reaching SDG 14 targets. However, its outcomes also touch upon at least 10 other SDGs. The Decade Initiative promotes a common framework for supporting stakeholders in studying and assessing the health of the world's oceans. The Decade also provides the framework for leveraging further investment in ocean research, as well as serves as a platform for building transformative partnerships and collaboration in a multi-stakeholder context. The framework is focused on 7 outcomes, which I will return to later, but are here highlighted on the left. The Decade Initiative is in its preparatory phase from 2018 to 2020, and I've put up a timeline here to show you what's happened or what will be happening in the near future. So there's been announcements for the Decade, preliminary Decade roadmap workshops, global planning meetings held in Copenhagen. The one in March 2020 in Paris was held virtually. And the UN Oceans Conference, of course, was supposed to be held in Lisbon in June, but has now been delayed. However, progress has continued, and there has been the recent publication of the implementation plan in August of 2020, and just recently the call for Decade actions. There will be a regional launch in Egypt, and then the main launch of the decade will be in Berlin, starting in 2021, of course, the implementation phase of the decade. But what about maritime cultural heritage in the decade? In the call for action, Our Ocean, Our Future, launched the first UN Ocean Conference in 2017, member states recognize that the ocean forms an important part of our natural and cultural heritage, and called on stakeholders to develop comprehensive strategies to raise awareness of the natural and cultural significance of the ocean. The draft roadmap of the decade, published in 2018, states that ocean science should be interpreted broadly as encompassing social sciences and the human dimension. The importance of cultural heritage has now been clarified during the preparatory phase of the decade, with the implementation plan, the second version, just published in August 2020, highlighting that ocean science is broad. It encompasses natural and social science disciplines, local and indigenous knowledge. The decade will create a paradigm shift in the generation of qualitative and quantitative ocean knowledge, including from currently data-poor regions, such as the deep ocean, and coastal areas where much of the human interaction with ocean is concentrated. The first global planning meeting of the decade was hosted by the National Museum of Denmark in Copenhagen in May of 2019. And the purpose of the National Museum in holding the meeting was to ensure that cultural heritage would be considered. The Ocean Decade Heritage Network, ODHN, was formed at this meeting by a group of 11 maritime cultural heritage specialists in attendance, which now form the Provisional Organizing Committee of ODHN. And this is some of us, of course, at the meeting, not all. ODN is now recognized as an official partner of the UNESCO IOC Decade. ODHN is a global network that represents a key stakeholder group of the decade: cultural heritage specialists, marine archaeologists, heritage managers, ethnographers, ocean literacy specialists who work in marine, underwater, and coastal environments and with coastal communities. We come from governmental, intergovernmental, academic, and NGO backgrounds. Broadly, we are in part those who study, work with, and represent the social sciences and human dimension referred to in the decade, about 200 members globally. Our purpose is twofold: to raise awareness in the cultural heritage community about the decade and to coordinate a targeted global response to improve the integration of cultural heritage within the marine sciences during the decade's phases, and two, to have the essential role of culture acknowledged in delivering sustainable development in our seas and our oceans, especially in line with the SDGs. By becoming a partner of the decade in May of 2019, we have been able to provide feedback on working documents from meetings and, most importantly, the working drafts of the implementation plan now being presented for ratification at the United Nations General Assembly this autumn. We are happy that suggested inclusion for cultural heritage has been considered and accepted, and working texts have been amended providing clarifications about what ocean science contains, including natural and social sciences, local and indigenous knowledge. And our suggestions for the implementation plan have in large part been accepted. There seems to be a place for maritime cultural heritage in the decade. But how can we safeguard maritime cultural heritage as a key to reach a sustainable future within the decade's framework? If we take a look at the Decade Action Framework, first focusing on the decade outcomes. I mentioned earlier here. And there's 7 outcomes, originally 6, but now 7 outcomes. An inspiring, engaging ocean was just added this summer. And MCH is key in all of these. If we look at a clean ocean, cultural heritage can contribute to a clean ocean by enabling better understanding of the extent and risks of legacy pollution from shipwrecks, mining waste, and land-based sources. A clean ocean is also important for the long-term preservation of MCH. A healthy and resilient ocean. Cultural heritage is fundamental to understanding how many coastal and marine ecosystems achieve their present form and to understanding the pressures upon them. Cultural heritage can be an important component of marine ecosystems. A predicted ocean. Understanding ocean past. Human interaction with the historic environment is essential to understanding our ocean present and to forecasting change and its implications for human well-being and livelihood. For a safe ocean, cultural heritage informs the understanding of coastal inhabitation and intervention in the past and present, including the impact of previous catastrophes, to identify risks, present examples of human adaptations, and to encourage resilience. A sustainably harvested and productive ocean, cultural heritage is a major contributor to the blue economy, especially through recreation and tourism. Increasing productivity should enhance and not damage irreplaceable cultural heritage. A transparent and accessible ocean. Information about cultural heritage is also essential to understanding the past, present, and future of humanity's relationship with the seas and oceans. An inspiring and engaging ocean. Information about cultural heritage is fascinating to the public, and it does enable engagement with many topics in ocean literacy. But how can we safeguard maritime cultural heritage as a key to reach a sustainable future within the Decades framework? And how can networks such as ODHN assist in this? So let's look again at the Decade Action Framework. First, we looked at the decade outcomes, but now let's look at the decade actions, the first step in the process. As we move forward to the beginning of the implementation phase of the decade, the just released call for action plans highlights the importance of networks in addressing the decade's challenges and ultimately helping meet the outcomes, those 7 outcomes that I discussed. The stakeholder engagement platforms highlighted here, looking at regional, sectoral, or thematic levels, specifically name possibilities for cultural heritage, and this is because of the lobbying that's been done by various stakeholders over the course of the last year that this is now included. The third objective for this present webinar meeting, is to establish a network of diverse stakeholders for the safeguarding of maritime tangible cultural heritage in the Asia-Pacific region. This might be a way forward for joining in the Decades initiatives. This is where we are heading with ODHN and as a thematic platform and alliance with UNESCO. And we are building alliances with other not-for-profits that focus on ocean science and with maritime cultural heritage. I would like to remind you of the ODHN platform, and I would suggest looking at our website for some of the networks we work with that might be of interest for MCH initiatives, globally and regionally. And I can think of some very good parallels, particularly in East Africa with the Rising from the Depths network. You can find these links and resources on our website, and we really want to serve as a clearinghouse for information for like-minded networks and interest groups. The aim with such networks is to have the power of cultural heritage acknowledged as a medium for engaging the public and addressing the sustainability of our coasts and our oceans, to investigate, protect, and celebrate long-standing relationships between people and the sea. Ultimately, the decade is a vital opportunity to improve focus on the ocean's cultural heritage, including intangible, indigenous, and traditional culture that can be safeguarded for a sustainable future in the face of modernization and climate change. We would like to suggest working together. There is a place for maritime cultural heritage at the table in the decade, and it will be in many forms. Thank you very much for your attention, and have a good meeting.